This episode of The Road Testament was supposed to be done at 1 o'clock. It's now 7 o'clock. Why? Because this episode is about Formula 1 2010, the game, and we've been playing it for 6 hours. JF Musial and I, Alex Roy, today discuss Formula 1 2010. JF.
Hey.
Formula 1 2010. I've been waiting for this game for a long time. The last time I played a Formula 1 game was the Formula 1 2006.
Really?
Didn't enjoy that so much. This is something special.
You know, we both play a lot of video games because, well, I can't really afford going on the track, and we don't really have the time to do that either. We have experience on the track, so we know the difference between reality and video games. But at the same time, you actually have experience in an F1 car years ago, right?
I know. I had maybe an hour experience in an F1 car, only about 10 minutes at any real speed. You know, before we get into that, look, we both agree this game is a really important game in the history of racing games.
Yes.
But you can't really talk about how important this game is and the pros and cons without talking about the games everybody knows for reference.
Yep, Forza and Gran Turismo.
And Gran Turismo. We've played every generation.
Yep. We've even gotten to meet the creators of the game.
Yamauchi.
Yamauchi. Yeah.
JF, which is your preferred game?
Well, I loved GT until I started playing Forza 3. Forza 3, both games have a certain realistic, they have a good value to them. They're set up. You can modify cars in Forza. Gran Turismo has always been more of the, I look at it as kind of the designer's game, while Forza is more about the driver's game, because Gran Turismo has these oversaturated images, and Forza is more about just the setup and the design and all the different variations of cars you can drive.
I would say that, Gran Turismo is, on the edge of sim.
Yes.
Because then you have things like iRacing and R-Factor and things like that. Whereas Forza is definitely more of a game.
Yes.
But both games capture something really important that, everyone who watches this, and I think we all agree, because in those games there are real-world cars some of us may own or drive.
Yeah.
That when you play the game, although you can't feel the physics of a car moving and braking, if you drive a car in the game you've driven in real life, you suddenly recognize the similarities to the real car.
Understeer, oversteer,
and
balance,
it's really clear where the game physics starts and real life ends. That's really obvious.
Yep.
And only a game that has real world cars can mimic that.
Yep.
So, last thing about this, let's talk about Formula 1 2010. I have a slight preference for Forza because as a game, the experience of playing it is more fun from a replayability standpoint.
Yep.
And although GT5 Prologue is all we know about GT5, and I'd love to see the weather in that game, I always felt like its ultimate power as a game was just a little short of Forza. Yep. Maybe because it's a little better technologically.
Yeah. Well, now moving on to Formula 1, Formula 1 2010, on the onset, when we first got this game, I actually thought it was a gimmick. I looked at it as Formula 1 getting together with Codemasters to just have another product to sell for $60. But after after driving for the past day, I'm actually quite shocked because it's not only about the racing experience, but you actually live the life of a Formula 1 driver. It's got all the cars from 2010. It's also got all the drivers from 2010. And when I say detail, it's got very good detail as in relation to all the cars, as well as the tracks. And not only that, unlike Forza, or unlike the current generation of Gran Turismo, this has crash damage as well as weather, which is a big factor that I would never have expected to be such a...
Well, there is damage in Forza, but...
Yes,
right.
Well, weather. Now, moving on, I thought it was going to be a gimmick, but then when we got into this, it's so much further than that.
Look, one thing, right off the bat, when this game has this career mode, this is the first driving game or sim where the career mode feels like a career.
Because you're actually playing the real race weekend in order as it is in 2010 in F1.
Very restricted paths. It doesn't feel like a gimmick to keep you on a path through a game path. This really feels like something, you make decisions, they matter. and the restricted path through. At first, I didn't think I liked it, but I really admire it.
Yep.
And one of the aspects of that is you play a full race weekend, rubber stays down on the track over time.
Yep.
Your decisions over time matter.
Yep.
Like, they actually cascade over time.
The track gets warmed up over the race weekend because it gets rubbered in, which is something I never thought would actually be in a game.
Beating your teammate results in, parts and upgrades for you.
And your career mode actually is affected as well, because if you start crashing in the game, you're not going to get another contract. And the whole point of the game, you only get to start off with the low teams up front, and then the objective is to get contracts with higher and higher teams.
I cracked a joke with Yamauchi, the Gran Turismo inventor, about how a really real racing sim, if you crashed, your character was killed, you couldn't actually play the game for 2 years, or you'd have to start from scratch. This game, obviously, isn't like that, but and let's just say this: the graphics are great. We can ignore the graphics; they're great.
If you crash in this, though, your race weekend is pretty much over.
This game, and you're right. What this game captures more than any other game, short of one where it deletes itself from your hard drive if you crash, what this game captures is the intensity, the experiential intensity of both racing and its consequences on subsequent racing, the cascading effects.
Yep.
And I absolutely. Utterly admire it because the game physics, which are extremely difficult,
Yes.
They more closely resemble even my limited experience in an F1 car. They're extreme consequences for ignoring basic realities of physics.
Yep.
And no one, hardly anyone who will ever play this game, except an F1 driver, will ever know, even remotely,
the reality
of an F1 car.
Yeah.
My limited experience, it was so limited, and I was told that.
Well, the one thing you did say to me was that under lifting off the gas, the amount of downforce in the car decelerates the car so much far greater than you would ever expect, which is something you said was real.
Yeah, and there's something, it took me, a couple of hours of playing this before I realized I was making a critical mistake. I was playing this as if it were a game, like Forza or any other game. But, the envelope of the car's capabilities is in-game are beyond the abilities of even most game players.
Yep.
You can't play it like a game. You really have to pay attention to the rules. And something? If you're a Formula One fan and you don't own this, then you don't really like Formula One. If you're not a Formula One fan, your learning curve on this is
going to be insane.
You're probably not going to enjoy it.
Because not only do you have to know how to properly drive a line, you also have to know the tracks very well. There's very little aid as to learning a track. You have a practice session, that's when you learn the track.
And watching the races on speed is not sufficient for learning a track. It really isn't.
There are a lot of there's 16 or 17 race circuits in F1 this year, and they all have their own characteristics.
I couldn't have more admiration for Codemasters for rendering the game as they did, and I mean from beginning to end experientially. However, it must be said that if you're not a Formula One fan and you want a racing game, this is not the game for you.
Agreed.
Unless you really want to learn something.
If you love the sport and you want to actually drive, it's a very good game. Now, the one downfall I have is actually when it comes to setup of the car. That's a very important factor when it comes to an F1 weekend. Obviously, is you have to choose your tires, whether it's raining, whether it's slick, whether it's cold, whether it's hot. But not only that, you also have to adjust your setup in terms of downforce.
You don't think it's realistic enough?
There are only a few settings in this game as to whether you want high downforce or low downforce.
Well, let's be clear. Let's be clear. There are 7 or 8 settings in the hierarchy of suspension. All right, 6.
Yeah.
And then you have 4 tire options. So you have 24 permutations.
Yes.
Obviously, that's pretty simplistic, but
when it comes to F1, you would want, but you're choosing based off of. Do you just want high downforce, low top speed, or do you want high top speed, low downforce? There's no setup in terms of how do you want the rebound on the suspension, or how do you want it's very basic, very simple.
But the reality of it is that's probably a good idea because very few people will ever master the actual driving of the cars
themselves,
rendering most of those choices irrelevant. Because if you can't take one of these cars in the game around the track without going off every time, then tuning the car on any level is they're not going to be relevant.
True.
So an awesome game. But it's for someone who's already mastered Forza or Gran Turismo.
Yeah. We were able to do multiplayer only between ourselves, not against a community. So that's one factor I have to say we have not been able to test correctly in terms of online gameplay. But against each other, it's a lot of fun because we're kind of like the same level.
I've got to add something about before we wrap that I absolutely love. That's brilliant. Never been done this well in any game I've ever seen. The penalty system, the race, warden system, the pit communications.
There are flags.
Those aspects are so wonderful in terms of realism.
Cutting corners, drive-through penalties,
And not just cool. I mean, a wonderful, wonderful lesson for anyone who really is into the sport. And, I wish, the safety cars weren't put in because they didn't have time to get to game release, but, things like that really matter.
Yep.
And great job.
And I have to give it to Codemasters for turning around this game so fast when it comes to these cars. F1 cars are constantly in development.
We're still in season.
And exactly. And what I can tell, these cars are pretty spot on. So I like the game a lot, and good episode.
Next week,
we're
Gumpert Apollo.
There we go.
And bedbug infestations and cloth interiors depreciating cars in the New York area. Next week on the Road Testament.
Frosted Franks as well. That's good.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
And you got 1 minute to spare.
Can I play?